You are seen. You are worthy. You are not alone. The world loses one person to suicide every 40 seconds. Let's change the stats. Together, we can say not suicide. Not today.
What becomes of a little girl who loves her mother so much that she would believe anything she told her? But what becomes of this same little girl when this same mom makes her believe that she has multiple illnesses, makes her undergo multiple surgeries, lies to everybody about her mental health and even her age? What if this little girl did everything that she possibly could to try to get out of her very abusive situation, but everyone around her has failed? But what happens when the situation becomes so dire that she believes that she only has one way out? The situation becomes very deadly. Join me as I examine the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard on this episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.
Welcome to True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People, the podcast where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction, and reminding you that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. Here is your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. All right, guys, right off the bat, I remind you, if you are in a situation where you feel like you want to hurt yourself or someone else, please dial 988. You can call them or text them. Your life, no matter what it is not worth it, and we all want you here. And if no one has told you this today, I'll tell you that I do care. All right, everybody, I hope you're having an excellent 2024 so far. Thank you for bearing with me over my small break. I do feel a ton better and ready to get into everything that 2024 has to offer. Before we jump into today's case, just wanted to give you the trigger warnings. This episode will deal with a brutal murder of someone. We'll also deal with severe child abuse. We'll deal with mental illness such as Munchausen by proxy. Also, we'll deal with some people call fantasy. Others may call it in the demonic realm when we talk about one of the people in this story who was possessed by a werewolf. So if any of these things are triggering to you, if you have to skip this episode, we truly understand, as your mental health is the most important part. So today's case, guys, I have been studying for the last 9 years, or I should say 8.5 now. It'll be 9 years in June of 2024. It seems like much longer than that. I was supposed to cover this case a long time ago on my very first podcast, A Day with Crime, but never got around to that. I got busy. I was going to actually write Gypsy Rose Blanchard in prison because I know that she does respond, but never got there. But now I think that this is the best time because of the fact that she is back in the news as she was released on December 28th. So this case is the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard in the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. This one may be a little bit longer. We do have to go through some background stuff leading up into everything else. I will tell you off the bat, I do not condone anything that happened in this case and how it went down. And you will see that I'm saying that now because you will find out towards the end that my stance on this case has always been the same, never changed. And I will say for some it is quite controversial, but you have to stick around to the end to find out what that was. If you want to follow along or just some reading material so you can look at the case yourself, you can follow up on Wikipedia. Murder of Dee Dee Blanchard is how it is listed. But I've done extensive research into this case. I will fill in all of the holes that is there because there are a lot in this case. So let's jump in. Dee Dee Blanchard was born Claudine Petrie in Chack Bay, Louisiana, which is near the Gulf Coast, in 1967, and she grew up with her family in nearby Golden Meadow. She was one of 5 children of Claude Anthony Petrie Sr. and Emma Lois Gisclair. Relatives recall that she had a habit stealing from her family, which they speculated was a form of retaliation when things didn't go her way. At some point early in her adult life, she worked as a nurse's aide, and the family expressed suspicion that in 1997 she may have killed her own mother by denying her food. When she was 24, she became pregnant by Rod Blanchard, then 17. They named their daughter Gypsy Rose because Dee Dee liked the name Gypsy and Rod was a fan of Guns N' Roses. Shortly before Gypsy Rose's birth in July of 1991, the couple separated when Rod realized he got married for the wrong reasons. He resisted Dee Dee's efforts to get him to return, and she took her newborn daughter to live with her family. Let's break some of that down. Because if you were listening, then you would have already pulled out that some of the same stuff that Gypsy Rose ends up going through looks like it was happening to Dee Dee. Family members has come out and said exactly that Dee Dee is doing the same thing to Gypsy that her mom did to her. Mom was very abusive. She took a lot of stuff from her mom. And so they suspect that, hey, towards the end, Dee Dee got tired and killed her own mom by denying her food. Now, from everything I've seen, they have never been able to prove that. It is just a speculation at this point. But going over the history of Dee Dee Blanchard, looking at what we're going to discuss here down the line here in a few minutes, I can see where that actually probably could be the truth. Also, as you heard, Dee Dee was a little bit older than Rod. Rod was 17, Dee Dee was 24. So had himself a little older woman, ends up getting her pregnant with Gypsy. And like everybody else in the free world, they feel like, well, the best thing in the world to do is to get married. But from all accounts, even out of Rod's own mouth, he really was not in love with Dee Dee. I think he just wanted to do this because he wanted to be the father that was there. And what he probably feared would happen did. Because after he said, this is it, not getting back together, peace out, she grabbed up Gypsy Rose and she left. And Rod became devastated. And that started the separation between he and his daughter that we will also talk about further down the line. And I do want to point this out, even though I'm going to read it here in a minute, but I think it's important to put this out there now because I've heard things over the last 8.5 years that is not true about Rod. And one of them that Rod didn't care, that Rod moved on. There was lies that even Dee Dee told Gypsy about Rod when he remarried. It is not true. Rod has beat himself up because he wasn't there, but he couldn't be there the way he wanted to because Dee Dee was blocking that. So I don't want anybody to think that Rod was just a deadbeat dad that went out and just did whatever. That was not the case. So what happened in Gypsy's childhood? Well, according to Rod, who remained involved with his daughter at this point, by the time Gypsy Rose was 3 months old, her mother was convinced that the infant had sleep apnea and began taking her to the hospital where repeated overnight stays with a sleep monitor and other tests found no sign of the condition. Dee Dee subsequently became convinced that her daughter had a wide range of health issues, which she attributed to an unspecified chromosomal disorder. And at some point, her mother claimed that Gypsy Rose had muscular dystrophy and made her use a walker. Gypsy Rose said that when she was 7 or 8, she was riding on her grandfather's motorcycle when they were involved in a minor accident where she suffered an abrasion on her knee. Her mother said that doctors had given her a wheelchair. She would need to use it. Let me kind of step that back and let me clarify that because that's not exactly what happened. Because they said the doctor gave her a wheelchair. Well, no, not really. So what happened as you read? Yes, Gypsy got into an accident on her grandfather's motorcycle. People, it was like a skin burn, right? So it was just like an abrasion. She could still walk. Her leg was fine. As you already heard, she's already convinced herself and other people that Gypsy Rose had muscular dystrophy, and she was already walking on a walker. This accident gave Dee Dee another reason to say, oh, wait, we can extend this walker situation. We've already got people thinking she has muscular dystrophy, she has to use this walker, but now she got into this horrendous motorcycle accident with her grandfather running on the wheelchair. So I believe, according to Ray, Gypsy Rose said it on her new special is, Mom brought up the wheelchair and said, get in it. I need you to get in this wheelchair. And I think Gypsy put himself for how long, said, I don't know, just get in the wheelchair. And that is how the wheelchair was born. After Gypsy Rose got in that wheelchair, due to a minor scrape on a motorcycle ride she went with her grandfather, she never got out. And that became one of the other catalysts in this whole story. So Gypsy Rose often went with her parents to Special Olympics events. And in 2001, when Dee Dee claimed Gypsy Rose was 8, which she was actually 10, she was named the honorary queen of the Crew of Mid-City, a child-oriented parade held during Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Gypsy seems to have stopped going to school after 2nd grade, possibly even as early as kindergarten. Her mother homeschooled her after that, supposedly because her illnesses were too severe. This was later believed to have been an attempt to isolate Gypsy to further her abuse, and she managed to learn to read on her own through the Harry Potter books. Yeah, doggone right, that's why she homeschooled her. Had nothing to do with she felt because her illness was getting worse, because Dee Dee in her mind already knows that Gypsy Rose is not sick. But what happens when you send a child to school? Now, it's even worse nowadays, because even if something's not going on in the house, if your child walks into a school and just says something like, my dad smacked me last night, somebody's calling DCFS and they're showing up at your door. That could be for cases like this, or it could be for a number of cases that I know in LA County they've blown. But that's what happens when children go to school. They go and they want to talk to their friends, or they want to talk to their teachers, or maybe they may say something in error. Maybe they would ask Gypsy Rose, Gypsy, why are you in this wheelchair? What happened to you? Maybe she would have came out and said, nothing, I can walk. Dee Dee could not take that chance, so homeschooling her was the only option. But as you can see, she wasn't really homeschooling Gypsy, because she wasn't teaching Gypsy anything. Gypsy Rose had to learn how to read on her own through reading the Harry Potter books. So homeschooling was just like it said here. It was a further attempt to isolate her from the outside world so that they don't know what she's doing, and that Gypsy Rose would never catch on to the truth of what her real age is. And even though she kind of knows in her mind, to further confirm to her that she is not sick. So Gypsy Rose's father, Rod, remarried. Dee Dee moved in with her father and stepmother. They later said that when prepping food for her stepmother, Dee Dee poisoned it with Roundup weed killer, leading to the stepmother's chronic illness during this period. During that time, Dee Dee was arrested for several minor offenses, including writing bad checks. When the Petries began to regularly confront her about her treatment of Gypsy Rose and express suspicion about her role in her stepmother's health, Dee Dee left with her child for the New Orleans suburb of Slidell, and her stepmother's health returned to normal shortly afterwards. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody is getting poisoned and you send the person away that you think is doing it and they get better, what is that saying? Now, as you may or may not know, Gypsy Rose has a new documentary that's out that was released when she got released from prison, called The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. What they did is they spent 18 months prior to her release interviewing her in the prison and on the phone to get her side of the story. I tell you that because it goes back to say that family members have become suspicious that she was coming with Roundup. A lot of Gypsy Rose's cousins and everybody's on this documentary, they saying the same thing. Yes, they believe that Dee Dee was the one that was putting Roundup weed killer in the food to kill her. The problem is Roundup ain't going to instantly kill you unless you make it obvious by putting the whole bag in there. So her mom was dying, but was dying very slowly. Well, on top of all of that, they're looking at how Dee Dee is treating Gypsy Rose at the same time. A lot of her family members like, we didn't believe she was sick. We knew nothing was wrong with her. We didn't know why Dee Dee was treating her this way. So the best thing for an abuser and a narcissist to do when they are getting ready to get found out is you pick up the child that can't do anything for herself because she's too young to stay behind, and we're going to move you somewhere else where nobody is around you that knows you so that I can continue to do this. And this is why they end up going to Slidell. Now, once they were in Slidell, they lived in public housing. They paid their bills with Rod's child support payments and with public assistance that Dee Dee had been granted due to her daughter's supposed medical conditions. They saw various specialists, mostly at Tulane Medical Center and the Children's Hospital of New Orleans, seeking treatment for the illnesses Dee Dee claimed Gypsy Rose had, which now included hearing and vision problems. While a muscle biopsy found no sign of the muscular dystrophy Dee Dee insisted Gypsy Rose had, she was successful in securing treatment for other purported issues. After she told doctors Gypsy Rose had seizures every few months, they prescribed anti-seizure medication. Several surgeries were performed on her during this time, and Dee Dee regularly took Gypsy Rose to the emergency room for minor ailments. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about this down the line, but I have to talk about this now. And if you're listening to this and if you are not disturbed at what I just read, take your pulse. Because apparently these doctors are missing the beat. Now, I have spent the last 8.5 years believing that all of these doctors had failed Gypsy and was faulty, that they all knew. Because if you're listening to what I'm reading, they're like, yeah, she came in with this, said this, we did muscle biopsies, but we found no sign of anything that Dee Dee is saying. But because Dee Dee said that she suffers from seizures every few months, they prescribe her anti-seizure medication. First of all, if you have a mom sitting in front of you that says, my child has muscular dystrophy, you do the muscle biopsy to find out if she does have it, and if so, how bad is it? It comes back, you don't have that. Red flag. Maybe you should start saying, we ain't going to treat you for anything else. We're not going to give you anything. Let me run some tests. Let's find out she's really epileptic. But no, she says Gypsy Rose has seizures every few months. Can you please give me some medicine? So they give her anti-seizure medication. They do several surgeries during this time because of what Dee Dee was saying. And she's always in the emergency room. Why is nobody paying attention to these red flags? Now, the only doctor I will kind of stand up for is Dr. Robert Steele. Dr. Robert Steele became one of Gypsy Rose's pediatricians. I say one of because what started happening is if Dee Dee kind of felt like somebody was catching on to her or was asking too many questions, she would move on to another doctor that didn't know anything that was going on and wouldn't really mention anything else. Robert Steele beats himself up every day because they gave him copies right on this documentary of all of these medical records that has not been accumulated, of all of the things that was said that Gypsy Rose was supposed to have. And he was like, I never knew any of this. If I would have known that this is what was going on, I would have done A, B, C, and D. I would have did whatever I could to protect her. I didn't know any of this. So now at this point, the doctors is failing Gypsy Rose. That is the last line of defense for her because no one else seems to know that Dee Dee is doing this to her, and they failed. So after Hurricane Katrina devastated their area, in August of 2005, the pair left their ruined apartment for a shelter in Covington set up for people with special needs. Dee Dee said Gypsy Rose's medical records, including her birth certificate, had been destroyed in the flooding, and a doctor there from the Ozarks suggested they relocate to her native Missouri, and the next month they were airlifted there. Lies, people. Even if the records were destroyed, they were made up anyway. This gave Dee Dee the freedom to create new medical records by going to doctors, saying, hey, all of my records got destroyed, doc, but here's everything she has. I just don't have the record to prove it no more. Also, it gave her the freedom to start manipulating Gypsy Rose's birth certificate because she says the certificate was lost. Gypsy Rose doesn't really know how old she is at this point. No one's really discussing that. Rod, her father, knows how old that she is, but he's been kind of cut out of the loop at this point. The abuse continues. So after Katrina, they did move to Missouri again. And at first, Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose lived in a rented home in Aurora in southwestern Missouri. And during that time there, Gypsy Rose was honored by the Ole Foundation, which advocates for the rights of feeding tube recipients, as its 2007 Child of the Year. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity built them a small home with a wheelchair ramp and hot tub as part of a larger project on the north side of Springfield to the east, and the two moved there. The story of a single mother with a severely disabled daughter forced to flee Katrina's devastation received considerable local media attention, and the community often pitched in to help the woman, who now went by Claudine Blanchard, and whom they knew as Dee Dee. So there was a bigger outpouring of support, which included many charitable contributions. In Louisiana, mother and daughter had at most availed themselves of occasional stays in Ronald McDonald houses during medical appointments. In Missouri, they received free flights to see doctors at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, free trips to Walt Disney World, and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts, where she was frequently photographed with Lambert via the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Rod Blanchard also continued to make monthly child support payments of $1,200 a month, as well as sending Gypsy Rose gifts and occasionally talking to her on the phone. And during one call on her 18th birthday, he recalls Dee Dee telling him not to mention her daughter's real age since she thinks she's 14. Let's break that down a little bit, because the fraud continues. Everybody has now bought into this whole bit. Gypsy is ill. Gypsy can't walk. Gypsy needs to have all these surgeries. I believe to this day, people, this poor girl only has about 16 teeth that is hers. Everything else is either a denture or is silver caps, like you went and had your kid drink too much Kool-Aid through a bottle and it rotted her teeth. All her mouth is silver caps. All of this was done to her by her mother. So everybody said, we got to help these people out. You heard me say earlier that the Ole Foundation, which advocates for the rights of feeding tube recipients. Yes, she put Gypsy Rose on her feeding tube. She was telling people that Gypsy Rose was afraid to eat, therefore she had to put a tube in her, which led to a lot of her teeth rotting and falling out. So now we got the Ronald McDonald House involved, Children's Mercy Hospital, Walt Disney World trips. I wonder if Walt Disney's ruined for this poor girl at this point now, because they use Walt Disney World all the time. Maybe this is where Dee Dee wanted to go, but if you go back through the history of this case, you see Gypsy Rose in a lot of Walt Disney outfits and going to Disney World and being happy to go there. This is one of their favorite places to go. Miranda Lambert donated money. I think 2 or 3 other country stars donated money, because after it came out that she could walk, they was like, man, we are duped. We upset. We didn't know. On top of that, Rod's still dishing out the dough for child support like a good dad should. $1,200 every month. And what this is to say is, whenever Gypsy said she was going to Walt Disney World, Rod would try to give her $100 or $200. Go ahead, baby, buy yourself some souvenirs while you there. Now, if she actually got to use her own money, I don't know, because I think Dee Dee probably right there her hand out and took that. But Rod was going above and beyond what a father should do at this point, because he thinks he's taking care of his daughter, because he doesn't know this is going on. As you heard me read, when Gypsy Rose turned 18, he had called Dee Dee, this out of his own mouth, and he was like that he was going to say happy 18th birthday. And she said, don't say that. And he's like, why? She's 18 today. That's a big milestone in life, to be 18, to be independent, to be an adult, to get the hell away from you. Well, you can't tell her that because she thinks that she's 14. Sure enough, on her birthday cake, it said, "Happy birthday, Gypsy Rose," with a big old 14 candle sticking out of it. She had convinced Gypsy Rose that she was 4 years younger than what she was. Gypsy Rose did not know any different at this time because she had really never seen any proof of her own birth at this point. She was just believing her mother when her mom said, "You turned 14 today." She's like, "Okay, I'm 14. She doesn't know any better. This suits Dee Dee well. Let me tell you, before we continue, why Dee Dee is doing the things in which she is doing. They believe that Dee Dee suffered from a mental disorder called Munchausen by proxy. It is also known as fictitious disorder imposed on another. Let me kind of explain to you what Munchausen by proxy is, just in case you don't know. If you look it up in the Mental Health Bible, it will give you two forms of that. It will give you Munchausen and it will give you Munchausen by proxy. They are very different in this way. Munchausen is when somebody is intentionally making themselves sick so that they can garner attention. Usually not financial gain. They just want the attention of somebody. Let's say you have a mother and a daughter. The mother is real dependent upon the daughter. Now the daughter decides, "Mom, it's time for me to move on. I got me a nice little man here. We can go ahead and get married. And there's nothing you can do to make me stay." So the mother, if I make myself sick, she'll never leave me because she loves me too much to do that. So she either creates symptoms or she looks things up and figures out a way that where she can have reactions of being sick so that the daughter will not leave and stick around. That is Munchausen. Munchausen by proxy is when you make somebody else sick for your own attention or for your own personal and financial gain. So if she never wanted Gypsy to grow up and move away from her and have her own life, this is what Munchausen by proxy is doing for her, because Gypsy Rose is being told that she is so ill that she would never be able to do anything for herself, that her mother has to be there with her all the time. So she will continue to make these symptoms happen either until Gypsy dies or until she dies. And the end result should be that Gypsy Rose will never have her own life. She will always be stuck in a sick state. She will always be in a wheelchair. Therefore, her mother will never, ever lose her. That is Munchausen by proxy. But in this twist, she also was doing it for personal gain. She was gaining a lot of money and a lot of benefits and a lot of free stuff just from having a disabled child. And the sad thing about it is, and this is no fault of Gypsy Rose's, but all of those things that you heard me read off, the Ronald McDonald House, the Habitat for Humanity home, the trips to Disney World, seeing Miranda Lambert as part of a Make-A-Wish Foundation plea, there is some child that was really sitting out there, that was really sick, that was really dying, that these may have been some of the wishes that they wanted, but since the Make-A-Wish Foundation can only give so many wishes at one time, this kid may have died and never got his or her wish because you got somebody that's greedy like Dee Dee Blanchard that's making this stuff up to make people believe her daughter was sick. So Rod and his second wife had hoped to get to Springfield and visit, but for a variety of reasons, Dee Dee changed plans. She told her neighbors in Springfield that Gypsy Rose's father was an abusive drug addict and alcoholic who had never come to terms with his daughter's health issues and never sent them any money. People, this is far from the truth when it comes to Rod Blanchard. But this is what she told people. She also told Gypsy Rose at one point that her father had married Christy, who is his current wife, and they were happy, which they had a daughter, and that's all that mattered to Rod. That Rod didn't care about Gypsy, so that she was on her own. These are the lies that was created so people would start asking, where is the dad? Why are you so destitute? Why are you so broke? she lied on this man. So many people who met Gypsy Rose were charmed by her. Her 5-foot height, nearly toothless mouth, large glasses, and high childlike voice reinforced the perception that she had all the problems her mother claimed she did. Dee Dee regularly shaved Gypsy Rose's head to mimic the hairless appearance of a chemotherapy patient, allegedly telling her daughter that since her medication would eventually cause her hair to fall out, it was best to shave it in advance. Gypsy often wore wigs or hats to cover her baldness, and when they left the house, Dee Dee often took an oxygen tank and feeding tube with them. Gypsy Rose was fed the children's liquid nutrition supplement Pediasure well into her 20s. Dee Dee also used physical abuse to control Gypsy Rose, always holding her hand in the presence of others. When she said something that suggested she was not genuinely sick or seemed beyond her purported mental capacity, she recalls that her mother would squeeze her hand very tightly. And when the two were alone, Dee Dee struck her with her open hands or a coat hanger. So before anybody asks, why didn't this girl say something to anybody? That's why. And I'll give you all the name of the documentaries, but I've seen them all. And there's this one disturbing one that always irritates me. If you watch the HBO documentary called Mommy, Dead, and Dearest, it should be real easy to find now because since all of this is now fresh back in the news, they're all at the top of the charts. So you should be able to find it. There is a scene where Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee goes to the doctor. If you look at the doctor, you can tell that the doctor is already now starting to question things that Dee Dee has said. As a matter of fact, he told the crew that, some of the things she was saying that Gypsy had, looking at Gypsy, the way she was talking, the way she was seeming to move, didn't give him the impression that what Dee Dee was saying was wrong with her was really wrong. So Dee Dee is holding Gypsy's hand and she's holding it like really tight. Dee Dee also would not let Gypsy be alone with some of these doctors all the time because of fear of what she would say. I believe there was a time where she was alone with the doctor, but Dee Dee had programmed her so well that if you don't go by this script when we get home, it's on, that she complied. Also, Gypsy was never too far out of Dee Dee's earshot or eyesight, so she always knew and could control what was going on. See, here's the things that leaves out. So that this story could be carried on, Dee Dee covered all her tracks. So she came up with, what if one day Gypsy does decide she's not with me? She can go tell people, look, people, I'm not sick. I can walk. My mom's making all this up. I'm getting beat up at home. Well, Dee Dee fixed that. How does she do that? She told everybody who would listen that Gypsy was not herself. That Gypsy Rose had mental conditions and she didn't know what she was saying and she made things up all the time. So you have to be real careful about what you believe when you hear come out of her mouth because I'm sorry, folks, but she's not well. People bought that. So the medical interventions continued. Dee Dee had some of Gypsy Rose's saliva glands treated with Botox, then extracted altogether to control her purported drooling. Gypsy Rose later claimed her mother induced drooling by using a topical anesthetic to numb her gums before doctor visits. The lack of salivary glands, coupled with the side effects of the anti-seizure medication she was given, caused her already few teeth to decay to the point that the majority of her front teeth were extracted and replaced with a bridge. Tubes were implanted in her ears to control her myriad purported ear infections. She had to become smarter. She had to make these doctors convinced. My daughter's got a drooling problem, doctor. We got to remove some of these saliva glands. Well, we're going to put a little bit of, anesthetic on the gums. Ambazol. Any of that stuff works. You put enough of that on your gums, put some on the tongue, you can't feel anything. What you going to do? You're going to sit there and you're going to drool. Well, now the doctor's like, oh, yeah, man, she's drooling all over the place. We'll go ahead and give you that surgery. Now, because of that, and because of the seizure medication, This girl is messed up for life. The few teeth she still had, gone. Extracted, got a bridge. All because of what she went to this doctor and did, and no doctor stopped and said, let's run a test. Why is she drooling? Why is your first thought is that we got to remove her saliva glands? Nobody's saying that. They're just saying, okay, let's go ahead and do the surgery. Well, then one day a doctor woke up and he became very suspicious. Bernardo Flasterstein, a pediatric neurologist who saw Gypsy Rose in Springfield, became suspicious of her muscular dystrophy diagnosis. He ordered MRIs and blood tests, which found no abnormalities. He said, and I quote, "I don't see any reason why she doesn't walk," he told Dee Dee on a follow-up visit after seeing Gypsy Rose stand and support her own weight. Flasterstein noted that Dee Dee was not a good historian, and after contacting Gypsy Rose's doctors in New Orleans, he learned that her original muscle biopsy had come back negative, undermining Dee Dee's reported diagnosis of muscular dystrophy, as well as her claim that all her records had been destroyed by flooding. He suspected the possibility of Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, and Dee Dee contrived to gain access to Flasterstein's notes and subsequently stopped taking Gypsy Rose to see him. Flasterstein did not follow up by reporting Dee Dee to social services. He said other doctors had told him to treat the pair with golden gloves and doubted the authorities would believe him anyway. And in 2009, an anonymous caller told the police about Dee Dee's use of different names and birth dates for herself and her daughter and suggested Gypsy Rose was in better health than claimed. Officers who performed the resulting wellness check accepted Dee Dee's explanation that she used the misinformation to make it harder for her abusive ex-husband to find them, and without talking to Rod and reported that Gypsy Rose seemed genuinely mentally disabled, the file was closed. There is a lot to unpack here. Let's unpack it. Here's how this scene played out. Here's how Flasterstein became Deceptive. If you go back and watch the documentary, you see this. And if you do, I want you to look at Dee Dee's face. So right in front of Dee Dee, Bernard Flasterstein asked Gypsy, "Can you stand up?" And she said, yeah, I think I can stand up. He had her stand up. Stood up perfectly fine. Able to support her own weight. Didn't look like she was going to buckle. Didn't look like that she was going to topple over at any time. So he goes back and he goes, "I don't see why she can't walk, Dee Dee. She stands up. You got to be able to stand up to walk." And that's when he said, Dee Dee is not a good historian, because everything that had been said, everything that had been told, everything that anybody knew about Gypsy Rose's health came from Dee Dee. Rod and his wife was able to get a hold of all of these. I think it was sometime after Gypsy Rose had got arrested. The lawyer sat down with him and he's like, "Look at all this stuff." And they started finding medication because they went through the house. So they found all this medication and stuff. And they're like, "Oh my God, we know all this is going on." But yeah, sure enough, what I just read to you was in all these documents where Flasterstein finally said she's not a good historian. She's making this stuff up. She doesn't know what illness this girl has this week, last week, or the week before is bad. So where did Flasterstein fail? He had all the evidence right there. Could have called social services. Could have been the big hero in Gypsy Rose's life. Just been like, "Hey, this girl comes in all the time. I think her mom's lying. I had her stand up. No muscle dystrophy patients I ever seen or anybody that has all these illnesses ever stood up like that." Did not do it. Peer pressure. Other doctors said, just treat them with golden gloves. For some reason, these other doctors were scared of Dee Dee. By the way, man, I doubt that the authorities going to believe you anyway. You're just taking a big risk. You're going to mess up your medical license for calling this stuff in. Just leave it alone. Doctors are supposed to be mandated reporters. That's part of the oath, is to do no harm and to help and to serve. That was a big failure. even though he had already suspected that Dee Dee did suffer from Munchausen Syndrome by proxy. Did nothing. So, of course, in Dee Dee's fashion, got access to Flasherstein notes, stopped taking Gypsy there, and moved. Now, how did she get a hold of his notes? The same way that me and you could get a hold of anything in any case that's been made public. She put in for Freedom of Information Act request. When you put in for that request, they have to send you everything that pertains to a case that you did not see if it was made public. Well, guess what was in the box of stuff that Dee Dee got? All of Flasherstein's notes. So now she knew that Flasherstein was onto her and that there was no way she can continue to go there because he knew the truth. The other big failure was the police. Police supposed to investigate situations like this. Okay, they're called by an anonymous person that's saying, look, man, you need to go save this girl. Her mom used all these fake names and birth dates for her and her daughter. I'm trying to tell you, Gypsy Rose is in way better health than what her mom is claiming. Why don't you go do a wellness check and find that out? They didn't ask her to stand up. They didn't ask her to be separated from her mom. They didn't say, can you walk? They didn't say, are you having a good time here? Separately, they asked her, is everything going okay right in front of Dee Dee? Didn't do anything to separate her from her mom so that they can ask her independently if any of this stuff that they heard from the anonymous tipper was true. No, they just did what everybody else did. They took Dee Dee's word for it. Yes, officer, it's true. I have to use all these names and birth dates because I have to give this misinformation so that it's harder for my abusive ex-husband to find us. Don't ask what the ex-husband's name is. Don't ask where he lives. Don't ask for a phone number. Just, we're not going to talk to Rod. We're going to go ahead and believe you, ma'am. You know what? The way your child looks, she looks like she can be mentally disabled. Have a good night. Don't worry about us no more. We close the case. Boom. Gypsy Rose right back in the same boat that she's been into now for years. So now at this time, Dee Dee seems to have at least once forged a copy of Gypsy Rose's birth certificate, changing her birth date to 1995 to bolster claims that she was still a teenager. Gypsy Rose said in a later interview that for 14 years, she was not sure of her real age. Dee Dee sometimes also claimed that the original had been destroyed during the post-Katrina flooding. Dee Dee did keep another copy with Gypsy Rose's real birth date. Gypsy Rose recalls seeing it during one of their hospital visits and becoming confused. Dee Dee told her it was a misprint. So now Gypsy Rose had attended science fiction and fantasy conventions since 2001, sometimes in costume since she could blend into their diverse and inclusive communities in her wheelchair. At a 2011 event, she made what may have been an escape attempt that ended when her mother found her in a hotel room with the man she had met online. Again, Dee Dee produced the paperwork giving her false later birth date and threatened to inform the police. And Gypsy Rose recalls that afterward, Dee Dee smashed her computer with a hammer and threatened to do the same to her fingers if she ever tried to escape again. She also kept Gypsy Rose leashed and handcuffed to her bed for 2 weeks. Let me step back because there's a lot of things missing there. So at this time, Gypsy had seen her real birth certificate. She had put it together that at this point, I believe she was 19. When she went to this science fiction and fantasy convention, I think she confided in this guy and he pretty much said, stand up for yourself. You 19, you are grown. You can do whatever it is that you want to do. Now, I believe the real story was, yes, she met him there, but didn't go home with him that night. She was at home, talking to him on the computer. He was telling her, man, you are independent. You can go. Look, you can come over here and you can stay with me. In which she said, but if I do, my mom is going to find me. And when she finds me, she's going to take me back. And his reply was, but you are grown. You are 19. Your mom can't do anything to you. Come on over. You can stay with me. I'll keep you safe. In which Gypsy runs away for the first time. Sure enough, like Gypsy says, Dee Dee comes and knocks on the door because she finally finds her after probably looking for hours. And she coerced Gypsy to come back by saying things that many abusers and narcissists say. I'm sorry. Come on home with me. We'll make things better. It won't be the same. She couldn't act a complete fool right there because there's a witness, even though she threatened to have him arrested for sleeping with a minor, which I don't even know if they even slept together at this point. She was just there. So then she gets Gypsy back home, pulls out another birth certificate. And according to Gypsy, that was now changed to 1995. And when they asked her, well, how do you think she changed? She goes, I don't know, whiteout or something. But she reduces this now birth certificate and says, see, you're not 19. You are really 14. And when they asked her, well, why didn't you just stand up and say that you was 19? She said, because she was my mother. I wanted to believe her. And she just produced this now birth certificate that she's telling me the one I saw before was a misprint. It was wrong. And now she produces one from 1995. So I just believed her. I don't think you could blame a child for that, especially one that has been dependent on their mother now for all these years, and everything that she knows comes out of Dee Dee's mouth and has to accept it as a gospel. So to make sure that she has no more communication with this guy or the outside world, she smashes Gypsy's computer. Now, this computer was not bought by Dee Dee. It was another charity gift that was given to her. So she destroys it with a hammer, threatened to do the same thing to her fingers if she ever escaped again, and then chained her to the bed for 2 weeks. And the bed that she was chained and handcuffed to was the same bed that Dee Dee slept in. So therefore, if she tried to get up or every time she moved, Dee Dee would wake up so she can see what was going on. So then if that wasn't enough, Dee Dee later told her that she had filed paperwork with the police claiming that she was mentally incompetent, leading her to believe that if she attempted to go to the police for help, they would not believe her. Can you see how this is starting to shape up now? Everything that this poor girl could have done, every resource that she could have used, Dee Dee has made sure that it is totally unusable. The number one resource that she had that was right there that saw her all the time was the doctors. They failed. So what begins to happen now? Well, earlier than what you guys probably know, Gypsy started getting tired of this stuff. So shortly after being freed from the bed, Gypsy Rose had unsuccessfully attempted to escape from the house again by shooting her mother 10 times with a BB gun, which she initially believed was a real gun. Let me tell you the rest of that story because they just jumped to that. Gypsy was going to run away a second time. She had packed all her bags up again, believing that she was grown, which she was. She hid her bag, I think, under the sofa somewhere. She was going to run away that night. Dee Dee found the bag. Dee Dee starts to come after her at this point. And I guess in Gypsy's mind, she's like, you know what? I've had enough of this. There was a gun that was sitting right there on the table. Now, I don't know why there was a gun sitting there. I don't know what was going on with the gun. But at that point, Gypsy finally said, I got enough. I'm going to just end this now, grab the gun, and shot Dee Dee 10 times. Well, after she shot her 10 times, she realized that it was a BB gun and it wasn't real. So when Dee Dee had to go to the hospital to get these BBs out, she came up with some story. I can't remember what the story was. Something she had got accidentally shot or whatever going down the stairs, over the case was, so that they wouldn't draw suspicion as to Gypsy Rose actually shooting her. That was the first attempt because this girl now was tired and she could not escape this personal hell. So now sometime around 2012, Gypsy Rose, who continued to use the internet after her mother had gone to bed to avoid her tightened supervision, made contact online with Nicholas Godejohn. He was a man around her age from Big Bend, Wisconsin, whom she said she had met on a Christian singles website. And Godejohn has a criminal record for indecent exposure and a history of mental illness, and sometimes reported as dissociative identity disorder. He also has autism spectrum disorder. Yeah, you heard that right. They met on a Christian singles website. I think it was something like christiandatingforfree.com or something like that. Now, she met him somewhere around 2012. They had been talking to each other for at least 2 years. So in 2014, Gypsy Rose confided to 23-year-old neighbor Aaliyah Woodmansey, who was unaware that Gypsy Rose was closer to her own age, considered herself a big sister, that she and Godejohn had discussed eloping and had even chosen names for potential children. Gypsy Rose, who had 5 separate Facebook accounts, and Godejohn flirted online. Their exchanges, sometimes using BDSM elements, which she has since claimed was more what he was interested in. Woodmansey tried to talk her out of it, still thinking she was too young and possibly being taken advantage of by a sexual predator. She considered Gypsy Rose's plans just fantasies and dreams, and nothing like this would ever really take place. Despite Dee Dee's efforts to prevent her from using the internet, which went as far as destroying her daughter's phone and laptop, she maintained contact with Woodmansey, who saved printouts of her posts until 2014. The next year, she arranged and paid for Godejohn to meet her mother in Springfield. Her plan was for him to just casually bump into her while she and Dee Dee were at a movie theater, both of them in costume, and apparently strike up a relationship that way, and then later for her to introduce him to her mother. As soon as they did meet in person for the first time, Godejohn says Gypsy Rose led him to the bathroom where the two had sex, and the two continued their internet interactions and began developing their plan to kill Dee Dee. Now, there's kind of some conflict up in that one, because from all accounts that I've read and I've seen, they both wanted the sexual situation to happen, and they both decided to go. I think Godejohn even left the theater first to go, and then Gypsy followed, and they ended up going into the man's bathroom. But if we step back, you heard me say that she had 5 separate Facebook accounts. I can barely keep up with one. So they flirted online. You also heard me talk about BDSM. Yeah, they had all these elements because there was different characters that was created by both of them. Gypsy Rose, I think, had like 5 different characters, if I'm remembering right. You know, one she said was her fantasy girl if she was being on her slutty side. And another one was, you know, a girl that was strong enough to stand up for herself. So they had went through this whole entire fantasy world situation. I'm not bad-mouthing people that's in the fantasy. If that's what you do, that's your thing. But this actually kind of led to something deadly, which is why it kind of honed in on that community, because this is what they were using for escape and to start to set up to kill Dee Dee. So even though her neighbor, Aaliyah, tried to say, man, let's leave this guy alone, you know, she didn't do that. And a lot of that is because, well, Gypsy had nobody else to really talk to. She was locked in this house. She met this nice guy on the Christian dating site. She thought everything would be fine. And now she starts to confide in him about what's going on. And when she starts to confide in him about that, you know, she's telling them, you know, I can walk. And I think it was after the first couple of months that she actually went to Nick Godejohn and said, I'm not as sick as everybody think that I am. I'm not sick at all. I can walk, I can move. And she starts telling him everything that her mom is doing, including up to, she doesn't want me to even be with you. I really love you, Nick. I want to be with you. What can we do? Well, then this is when this whole murder plot starts to begin. This is when Nicholas Godejohn now starts to unveil that, Well, he kind of has alter ego too, and one of them is being possessed by like a 5,000-year-old werewolf named Victor. So as they start to plan all this stuff out, he's saying Victor's going to do the murder. And Victor is going to be the one that's going to do all of this stuff. And of course, she's buying into all of this because now she just wants out. So what happens with the planning of that? So Nicholas Godejohn returns to Springfield in June of 2015, and arriving while Gypsy Rose and her mother were away at a doctor's appointment. And after they had returned home and Dee Dee had gone to sleep, he went to the Blanchard house. Gypsy Rose let him in and allegedly gave him duct tape, gloves, and a knife with the understanding that he would use it to murder Dee Dee. Let me correct that right now, because it makes it sound like that all of a sudden Nick just returned, in 2015 and they were out and then she just waited. No, Nick came in the middle of the night. When they decided to do this, Nick had to take a Greyhound bus from, I believe, where he lived in Wisconsin to them in Missouri. He was in constant contact with Gypsy Rose when he got here. He was in constant contact with Gypsy Rose when his bus arrived at the bus station. There's text messages to prove this. Okay, he said, "I'm here." And she said, the door's open and just come on in. And everything was carried out. You're going to go in the bathroom, yada, 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 right? And you're going to wait for me to do this thing. And they had the whole thing pretty much planned out. So Gypsy Rose hid in the bathroom, covered her ears so that she would not have to hear her mother screaming. Godejohn then stabbed Dee Dee 17 times in the back while she was asleep. Afterward, the two had sexual intercourse in Gypsy Rose's room, where she also performed fellatio on him and took $4,000 in cash that Dee Dee had been keeping in the house, mostly from Rod's child support checks. They fled to a motel outside Springfield where they stayed a few days while planning their next move, and during that time, they were seen on security cameras at several stores, and Gypsy Rose said at that point she believed the two had gotten away with their crime. They mailed the murder weapon back to Godejohn's home in Wisconsin to avoid being caught with it, then took a bus there. Several witnesses who saw the pair on their way to the Greyhound station noted that Gypsy Rose wore a blonde wig and walked unassisted. Let me fill you in on some of these things here, because they made it sound like that all of a sudden Godejohn did the murder and they were so happy they wouldn't have sex, and that's not what happened. Here's what happened. So Godejohn did show up. She did go in the bathroom. This is the first thing that I'm going to say of why I believe Gypsy Rose never wanted her mom dead, but this is the only way out. Because she couldn't do it herself. They asked her profusely, "Why didn't you do it?" And she said, "I'm just squeamish and I can't do it." But here's the other reason why I believe that she didn't want her mom really to die. She wanted any other way to get out of it. If you want somebody to die, you do not care what happens to them as long as they die. You don't care what you do to the body before. You don't care what you do to the body after. You just want the person gone. Well, what happened with this whole sex scene is, remember I told you about the 5,000-year-old vampire Victor. Victor was who was going to possess Nicholas Godejohn's body that night. And he said many times, even to the police, that Victor was the one that was doing the murder. But he looked at Gypsy and he said in text message before he got there to do this thing, I think it was like a night or two before, he's like, Victor will make sure he does the job right because Victor loves to kill. By the way, Victor wants to rape your mom when it's over. And Gypsy Rose drew the line right there. She says, "You cannot rape my mother." And he was insistent. This is how Victor operates. This is his mode. This is what he's going to do. I don't know if I can convince him not to go through with the rape because that's part of the whole murder. So finally, Gypsy Rose said, "You cannot rape my mom, but here, if it makes you feel any better, since I won't let you rape my mom, then you can come and you can rape me." And that's when Nick said, "Okay, fine." He gets there that night and tells Gypsy Rose, "Get your ass in the bathroom and I'll knock on the door when I'm done." Now, they came up with a secret knock on the door. And when Gypsy Rose was asked, "Why did you come with a secret knock?" She said because in her mind, she kind of thought that Dee Dee was going to actually end up hurting Nick Godejohn. So therefore, if she heard anything but this knock, she was not going to open up the door. So as it says here, he carries out the murder. After he's done, he does go back. He knocks on the door, that secret knock. He's covered in blood, dripping from his hand because he actually ended up cutting his hand in the process of killing Dee Dee. Instructed Gypsy Rose to clean up the blood that was dripping. And after she cleaned it up and cleaned up his hand, he ordered her into her bedroom where he forcefully raped her at that point because she sacrificed herself to Victor so that her mother would not be raped. That was that whole story of how the sexual intercourse happened after the fact at the house in her bedroom. The way this was read, it made it sound like the they just went, man, she's dead. All right, let's go have sex. That's not what happened. This is how it happened. Now, when they got back to the hotel, Gypsy Rose even admits this in her new documentary, The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And you saw this, if you saw the evidence, there was actually a video that they made. She goes, we were going to shoot our own porno. So they were laying there butt naked and they had sex since they've been there. And she admits that she was high because during all of this time, Gypsy Rose had gained an addiction to some of the pills that her mom was feeding her and sleeping medicines and all kinds of stuff and Vicodins. And so she said, I was high out of my mind when this whole murder thing went down. So people took that as her being ruthless and cold-hearted. I'll say it again. If you really want somebody to die, you really don't care what happened to them. If you hate somebody to that degree that you want to kill them, you can say, man, I'm a raper when I'm done, and then I'm going to chop off a finger and I'm going to hang it up in the rail. And the person, when it's done, says, I don't care what you do, as long as it gets done and you don't put me in it. This was not the mindset of Gypsy Rose, I don't believe, folks. So slightly after that, Facebook posts starts going up on Dee Dee's account that she shares with Gypsy Rose. And friends suspected something was wrong. When phone calls went unanswered, several friends and neighbors went to the house. And while they knew that the two often left on medical trips unannounced, they saw Dee Dee's modified car still in the driveway, making this unlikely. Protective film on the windows made it hard to see inside the low light, and no one answered the door, so the gathered friends called 911, and when the police arrived, they had to wait for a search warrant to be issued before they could enter, but they allowed one of the neighbors present to climb through a window where he saw that the inside of the house was largely undisturbed and that Gypsy Rose's wheelchairs were all still present. About the protective film over the window. If I can remember this right, Gypsy Rose used to like to look out the window. And after she tried to run away twice, she said, you can't see in the outside no more. I don't want nobody looking in. So she covered the window with protective film that blacked out the window so that nobody could see what was going on inside. So when the warrant finally got issued, the police entered the house and found Dee Dee's body, and a GoFundMe account was set up to pay for her funeral expenses and possibly Gypsy Rose's. All who knew the Blanchards feared the worst. Even if Gypsy Rose had not been harmed, they believed she would be helpless without her wheelchair, medications, and support equipment like the oxygen tanks and feeding tubes. People still did not know that she was not sick. They were fearing that Gypsy Rose was kidnapped by whoever killed Dee Dee and murdered herself, or they're just taking her along for the ride. They're like, this girl's not going to survive. Her feeding tube is here. She has no oxygen. Her oxygen tanks. And how the heck is she getting around? Her wheelchairs are all here. When Mancy, who was among those gathered on the Blanchards' lawn, told police that she knew about Gypsy Rose and her secret boyfriend. She showed them the printouts she had saved, which included his name. And based on that information, police asked Facebook to trace the IP address from which the post of Dee Dee's account had been made. It turned out to be in Wisconsin, And the next day, police agencies in Waukesha County raided the Godejohn's Big Bend home. Godejohn and Gypsy Rose surrendered and were taken into custody on charges of murder and felony armed criminal action. The news that Gypsy Rose was safe was greeted with relief in Springfield, where she and Godejohn were soon extradited and held a $1 million bond. But in announcing the news, Greene County Sheriff Jim Arnott warned, things are not always what they appear. The media in Springfield soon reported the truth of the Blanchards' lives, that she had never been sick and had always been able to walk, but her mother had made her pretend otherwise, using physical abuse to control her. Arnott urged people not to donate money to the family until investigators learned the extent of the fraud. Let's step back because I want to clarify one other thing, because they just made it seem like, again, these Facebook posts just all of a sudden came up and they were gloating. According to Gypsy Rose, and I do believe this, once the murder was done and they left and they went to the motel, nobody knew anything. Essentially, Dee Dee could have laid there for months and nobody would have ever found her or thought anything different. As you already heard me say from one of the neighbors that was next door, Aaliyah, she said, well, we know that they go on these impromptu medical trips. So if they just up and left one day and didn't tell anybody, we wouldn't be shocked. So Gypsy stated that she wanted her mom to be found. And the only way in which that she could think that that could happen without them being there or hopefully them not getting caught was to go and leave the Facebook post. Gypsy Rose left the Facebook post that was there, nobody else. And she said she had to write the Facebook post in a way that somebody was going to read it and it was going to cause somebody to say, hey, what's going on? And that's what it did. The post simply read, pardon my French, the bitch is dead. And then people start chiming in saying, what is going on? Did your Facebook get hacked? Sounds like y'all are watching the movie. Somebody said, I bet it did get hacked. So now Gypsy Rose is like, all right, people's not really believing it. So I got to write another post so that people actually know that this is real. So she wrote another post that said, I effing slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so effing loud, laugh out loud. And somebody said, Dee, what's wrong? And somebody said, that is not Dee. Well, what ended up happening to that is exactly what Gypsy Rose wanted to happen. As people read those posts, they called the police, which is what you just heard. The police went out there and then they discovered that she was dead in the house. That was all Dee Dee's doing. Again, somebody who doesn't care, even though what she did was wrong, is not going to do that. So then what happened at their trial? So after the disclosure of how Dee Dee had treated Gypsy Rose, sympathy for her as the victim of a violent murder rapidly shifted to her daughter as a long-term victim of child abuse. While the charge of first-degree murder can carry the death penalty under Missouri law or life without parole, County Prosecutor Dan Patterson announced he would not seek it for either Gypsy Rose or Godejohn, calling the case extraordinary and unusual. After her attorney obtained her medical records from Louisiana, he secured a plea bargain to second-degree murder for Gypsy Rose. She was so undernourished up to this point. During the year she was in the county jail, her lawyer told BuzzFeed that she had gained 14 pounds in contrast to most of his clients who typically lose weight in that situation. In July 2016, she accepted the plea bargain and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. A plea bargain. Now, maybe nobody will ever tell you this from the prosecution of the judge, but here's what I believe. I believe that he went so hard on this plea is because when they read her medical records, saw how undernourished that she was, heard the stories, they already pretty much felt like that she had already went through enough abuse. Even Gypsy Rose herself, though, says, I deserve to be punished for what it is that I did. And I know they felt that way, too. So the best thing that they could do was say, let's plea bargain this down to second-degree murder. Because if you guys understand how the murder trades work, since Gypsy was technically the mastermind behind it, right? She was the reason why Godejohn came to kill her mother. You're still guilty of first degree. First degree has to be premeditated. It was premeditated. She had already told him when, and it took a couple of weeks to get all this together. So she too could have been convicted of first degree murder. But again, I believe that they felt like she went through so much abuse. We're going to go second degree. We're going to give her 10 years, but she has to serve 85% of her sentence, which would make it, I believe, 8 years at that point before she can even step in front of a parole board. So what happened to Godejohn? So Godejohn still faced the more severe charge because prosecutors contended that he initiated the murder plot, and he and Gypsy Rose agreed that he was the one who killed Dee Dee. He was also more severely prosecuted due to different personal circumstances. Godejohn was given less sympathy and understanding due to a lack of involvement in the abuse. Gypsy Rose's plea bargain agreement did not require her to testify against him. But in January 2017, his trial was postponed when prosecutors requested a second psychiatric exam. His lawyers contend that he has an intelligence quotient of 82 and is on the autism spectrum, suggesting that he has diminished capacity. He initially waived his right to a trial by jury, but changed his mind in June of that year. In December of 2017, the judge set Godejohn's trial for November 2018. In their ongoing statement, prosecutors alleged that Godejohn had deliberated for over a year before the crime, while his lawyers pointed to his autism and said that Gypsy had formulated the crime and their love-struck client had just done as she had asked. The next day, prosecutors showed jurors the text messages, sometimes sexually explicit, that Gypsy and Godejohn shared in the week before the murder, after using various personas, as well as the knife he had used to commit the murder. In some of the texts, he asked for details about Dee Dee's room and sleeping habits. These were supplemented by video of his interview with police after his arrest when he admitted to killing her. Gypsy Rose testified on the trial's third day. She said that while she had indeed suggested to Godejohn that he kill Dee Dee to end her mother's abuse, she had also considered getting pregnant by him in the hope that once she was carrying Godejohn's child, Dee Dee would have to accept him. Along with the knife that she gave to Godejohn, she stole baby clothes from Walmart during a shopping trip so she could go ahead with either plan. However, she said Godejohn never told her what he thought about the pregnancy plan. After 4 days, the case sent to the jury, jurors had the option of finding Godejohn guilty of one of 3 murder charges: involuntary manslaughter, second degree or first degree murder, or not guilty. After approximately 2 hours of deliberation, they returned with the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. In February 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder conviction, and the only possible option since prosecutors had declined to seek the death penalty. Godejohn asked Judge David Jones for leniency on the armed criminal action charge, which carries a minimum sentence of only 3 years, saying that he had fallen blindly in love with Gypsy Rose, and he received a sentence of 25 years on that charge, which is concurrent with the life sentence. Jones also denied a motion by Godejohn's lawyer, Dwayne Perry, for a new trial. Perry argued that the jury should not have been allowed to hear that Godejohn had considered raping Dee Dee on the night of the murder, and also argued that the state psychologist should not have been allowed to testify, while Godejohn's psychologist should have, to establish that he had diminished capacity. In denying the motion, Jones conceded that an appeals court could find the latter point significant and consider it a reversible error. So a couple things to throw in there before we wrap this up. There were some things that has now come out that we did not know about this case that makes this case even a little bit crueler than what it already was. See, for all of these years, for the last almost 9 years, Gypsy Rose has never been able to tell her side of any story. The only story that we ever heard was one that was either told by Dee Dee at that time or was pieced together by family members of knowing what happened to Gypsy Rose. Even in interviews that Gypsy Rose has had over the last 8.5 years, Dr. Phil being one of them, it was always very poignant. She could never be free to really talk about everything because, of course, on these shows, they just want to hone in on what you did, why you did it. Let's talk about your mom. Well, that all ended when she got out of prison. And for 18 months, the producers went and talked to only her by phone and by visits to get her whole story. And when they found out she was going to be paroled, they released it shortly after that. And you've heard me mention it before. It's called The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Here's the things that we did not know prior to this. Dee Dee was so hell-bent that Gypsy would always be lonely and stay with her that she tried to place a curse on Gypsy Rose. Now, Gypsy states that her mom had dabbled with curses and the dark arts, and she did exactly this. She went out and she got a jar. The ingredients I remember was she put some cow tongue in there, and I guess some of Gypsy's menstrual blood. And I think there was a third ingredient I can't remember, but then she buried this jar in the yard and said, "You are now cursed. You will never find love. You will never marry anybody. You will never have no kids. This is what your life is going to be. Love it or leave it. Congratulations." So after that, what are you going to say, man? Like, now I'm cursed. So she believed that her whole life. The other revelation that we did not know that she brought up is that Dee Dee's father had molested her when she was young. And she never told anybody, except for she did tell her stepmother that her grandfather, Claude Petrie, had molested her. Even gave her the details of going out to, I guess, a shed in the house where nobody was around, and he was touching her and he forced her to touch him and was pretty much saying, you know, you don't want Paw to go to jail, do you? Don't ever tell anybody. Now, I'll let you make up your mind if this is true or not. So, of course, the producers did what? They went to Claude and said, "Hey, Claude, so Gypsy Rose just told us that when she was a young child that you molested her." And this dude was like, "I never did. That's totally untrue. That's totally untrue." And so the producer's like, "So are you trying to tell me that Gypsy Rose would lie about this?" And his story switched. He said, "I didn't touch her, but she always wanted to touch me. And when she tried to touch me, I said, no, you can't be trying to touch me down there." I think Gypsy was like 4 or 5 at this time or something like this. What does a 4 or 5-year-old, even if you were 6 or 7-year-old, know about touching you somewhere in a sexual manner? And this is what he's saying. No, she tried to come on to me as a young kid sexually. I'm the one that batted away her advances. You can take it for what it won't. I believe that he is lying. I believe he did that, and he tried to use that to gaslight the situation. She was addicted to pills. So all of this led her to be addicted to pills. And Viking, like I said earlier, she talked at length about that and said, yes, she definitely was addicted to them. And she's been sober now for a number of years. She was actually taking these in jail, lied to her stepmom to send her $50 so that she could actually buy drugs in there. I think that she's been sober now 4 or 5 years at this point. So this proves that you can't get this stuff in jail. Then her biggest secret was, so if you do watch the documentary, up until a certain point, you start hearing that, yeah, you know, her father and stepmother has made room. They're waiting for her to come. They got her a room. And then she says, well, I'm secretly engaged. Now, I believe it was 2019 that she had a boyfriend named Ken. Her and Ken got serious and they were going to get married in 2020. I do not know if it was him, but I think at the time when Dr. Phil did his interview in 2017, he even asked her about her love life and she said she had a boyfriend. Might have been somebody different. You guys got to understand that Gypsy Rose is not an ugly girl. She's a very beautiful girl, and I'm sure she got a whole bunch of letters from all kinds of dudes that was trying to be her new man. But she really had fell in love with this Ken guy. What happened was he didn't want to deal with the fame. So there was a movie called The Act that had got released, and Joey King had played Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Well, it was at this point because now Gypsy's whole life is out there for everybody to see. Well, this young man decided that he could not take the fame, didn't want no parts of it. It was too much for him to handle. And he ended up breaking up with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. This pretty much devastated her. For love, that was it for her at that point. She was believing that the curse was really true, that she was never going to find anybody, because she made the statement that every time she found somebody to love, something always happened to them. So then if you go further, I don't want to ruin the whole thing for you, but it's important to the story. Her mom and dad is pretty much preparing from her to come home. They got the room and everything together, and there's a secret. And the secret is that she has been engaged for some time to a guy named Ryan Anderson. Now, Ryan was aware that she had never told her parents that she was engaged. Better yet, didn't tell her parents that she was even thinking about getting married. And so you see that he says, well, when are you going to tell them? You got to let them know. You can't get released and they don't know, because right there, they're going to think that you're coming home to live with them and they don't know anything about me. So you see her actually tell her stepmom, I have a secret that I've been hiding. I'm actually engaged to get married, and that's where I'm pretty much going to reside after I'm out of jail here. If Gypsy ever hears this, I want her to take what I'm about to say about this whole marriage thing, not as a judgment call, but as somebody that's been married for a whole lot of years, and the conflict that she was facing there. And I have the same face and sentiments that her stepmama has when she says, whatever you do, don't get married. Marriage is a wonderful thing if it's done in the right context. Now, they got married back in August of 2022 while she was still yet in prison. So they've been married for a few months, even prior to her getting out. Problem is sometimes we got to look at why is people getting married to people that has been famously in jail. Now, when it comes to Ryan, I was kind of saying maybe he just wants the clout, right? Maybe he wants to be known for being married to this famous girl. I don't know what it is. But then when you dig into him a little bit and you listen to what he had to say on the prison confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, he's like, man, I gave up a lot of stuff to be with Gypsy Rose. Don't think I came out of this unscathed. So he's a teacher, a very good teacher, from what I understand. And prior to his relationship with Gypsy Rose, he was working for a Christian organization. But once the Christian organization found out that him and Gypsy Rose was a thing, they pretty much went to him and said, you got to get rid of this relationship or you got to resign. He resigned. He now has a new job. So I don't think it's because he wanted to chase clout or anything. I think he really does have feelings for her, but I just think it's the wrong time to be married. Maybe Ryan is ready to be married, but Ryan has also not been in jail for the last 8 years. Gypsy Rose has not been able to deal with what she did. She hasn't been able to grieve the murder of her mother, even if she was a part of it. She hasn't been able to know what it's like on the real world, on the outside. Understand that the moment that all this happened, except for Nick Godejohn and a couple of days that they were still free, that's all Gypsy Rose has ever known. All she's ever known is being underneath somebody's thumb, being in a wheelchair, told what to do, told they sick. She never got to date around. She didn't know what an iPhone probably was unless they heard it in there, but didn't know how to work once she got out of prison. Didn't really know how to operate social media. I think she's like 32 now. Doesn't know how things a 32-year-old needs to know. And what concerned me is you see her several times in the documentary talking to her doctor saying, I don't know if I'm ready to do this. I haven't experienced anything in life. I have never dated around. I don't know what to expect. How can I be somebody's whole wife now? And they even asked her, well, what do you think that Ryan's thinking about this? And she even said it. I think Ryan feels I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to cheat on him. And it's possible. I have friends that's never been locked up that dated one person their whole life, divorced now because of infidelity, because they felt like they missed out on something because all they ever did was dated this one person. Now, of course, in our Christian beliefs, we should not be sleeping around. We're supposed to be married before we have sexual intercourse and the whole nine. I get all that. But even without the sexual intercourse part, she doesn't know what it's like just to go on a date with anybody else. She doesn't know what it's like to have a true breakup. Because even though I know it's devastating to her, I don't know if I call Ken a true breakup because it wasn't a true breakup in the sense. They didn't spend time together. They didn't hold hands. They didn't go to the movies. They didn't confide deep, dark secrets into each other. They didn't spend a year being together. And then all of a sudden he comes and says, you know what, I'm out. That's a heartbreak. Not saying she wasn't heartbroken in prison, but it's a different heartbreak. You didn't really touch this guy. You couldn't see him. When you did see him, it was brief. Your touching was very brief. There's a few pictures of them, but she doesn't know what the real world is. And you really don't know what marriage is. And mentally, she's even said it herself, I'm physically free, but I'm not mentally free. I won't be mentally free for a long time. She said 10 years. I'm going to say life. Does Ryan really know what he signed up for? Becomes that question. Because he kind of rushed into that too. And I'm speaking from a person that knows, because as you guys already know, I'm a survivor of abuse. This is why I ended up getting married so many times. So I know what I'm talking about. My dad was abusive. The moment one of my wives became abusive, gotta go. That's divorce number one, because I never got to deal with my childhood trauma of abuse. I didn't know what it was like to stick it out with somebody for the long haul. Didn't know what it was like to say, beyond all this, we can work this out. No, I just know how to run because I don't want to deal with this situation anymore. So if I was just getting married and the state of mind that I had when I got married to my wife now over 20 years ago, I probably would have only married one time. But this is what I'm seeing for Gypsy. Is Ryan prepared to deal with the night sweats? Is Ryan prepared to deal with the nightmares? Because they're going to come. Is Ryan prepared to deal with the depression? Does he know what to do? Because it's going to come. Are you ready to handle what's going to happen when Mother's Day rolls around? So I'm greatly concerned about this marriage. I really hope that they do work. But I'm telling you, from everything that I know, unless this guy is like just the special guy from all over the world, and he's more special than anybody knows, I think there's some turbulent times coming ahead. But I will say this, even though I'm not sure about the marriage, I hope it does not fail. Here is the one thing I think Ryan Anderson can do to make sure that it doesn't fail. He has to show Gypsy something that she has never seen before in her whole entire life. And that is that somebody, regardless of what she puts him through, regardless of what he says, regardless of her emotions, that he's going to say, I choose to love you through this, and we can get through it. It takes a special person to love people like us. It takes a special person to love someone that's been through mental abuse. You guys don't know if you've never been through it. We are very complicated people. And once we let you into that circle, if you betray that, that's it. So I hope that it does work out for them. I really, 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 really want it to work out. And I know that she is worthy of all the love that anybody can give. And if Ryan is willing to stick it out and do that, because, you know, it's kind of a big deal right now, but eventually this is going to die down. Eventually, all the cameras go away. Eventually, nobody's going to wake up in the morning and Gypsy Rose Blanchard is going to be the first thing on their mouth, and you're going to have to deal with real world issues. So I wish them the best. So as you guys know, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, now Gypsy Rose Blanchard Anderson, was released from jail on December 28, 2023, after serving 8 years of her sentence, which is what it was called to do, for her to get early parole. And because of that, Nick Godejohn's defense attorneys are appealing for a new case. So I told you guys at the end of this, I would tell you in closing what I thought about this case. I also told you that my opinions is very controversial. So here they go, and bear with me. I do not believe, I have said this for 9 years, I will say it until I'm dead, I do not believe that Gypsy Rose Blanchard should have ever spent 1 day in jail. I'm going to tell you why. Again, I do not condone what she did. She was a mastermind behind this. Yes, everybody that's Things she went to jail, said she got a good deal because she should have went down for first-degree murder. I get that. But sometimes in these cases, we have to look at the circumstance and we have to look at the whole case. If we only want to see the parts of the case that we want to see, you're not seeing the whole case. And the whole case, if you're looking at it, is you took an innocent child, you made her become sick, you lied to her, you abused her, you hid her age. When she tried to get away from you, you chained her to a bed, you locked her father out of her life, you lied to every neighbor you ever had. You made them think that this girl was a mental case. The police failed to help you. The doctors failed to help you. The neighbors failed to question. Rod gets a pass from me because he did not know, because Dee Dee was keeping that hidden, but he was doing what he's supposed to by sending money and asking repeatedly to spend time, and she was locked out. Taken out of school, locked behind the doors of her house that had blacked out windows so nobody can see or save her. Gypsy Rose was the girl that was locked in the cage that had one way out. And the only way she saw out was to have her mother killed. If you were listening to the story, she tried other things to avoid that. She even went to Nick Godejohn and said, man, look, get me pregnant, and then maybe she has to accept this fact that I'm grown and let me move out if I'm pregnant with your baby. But he didn't respond to that because Nicholas Godejohn, at least Victor, wanted to kill somebody. Gypsy Rose, I'm not saying she'd have got away with anything. She doesn't even believe that. But put her where she needs to be. Put her into a mental health hospital for 10 years. Give her the help that she needs. Train her what it's going to be like to get out of jail. She's not Nick Godejohn. She's going to get out in 10 years, max, which would have made her, 34 years old. You're still going to be a very young lady. We need to teach you what it's like on the outside when you do get out. The men that's been writing you, some of them may be good, some of them may not. What do you really think of the man you're going to marry? We needed to take her through that. She already went to prison. She already suffered. And from my own personal life, if I was old enough and I knew what I was doing as a kid, and if I could have probably figured out how to kill my dad, I probably would have killed my dad. The things that I saw, the changes of the beds of my mom, the abuse I went through constantly, the we trying to escape, but he moved us with no family, man, all this stuff adds up. And the only thing that you start to see is you or it's me. I think the judge in this case did the best thing that they could do other than putting her in a mental hospital. I kind of blame the attorney for that. I think if I was the attorney, that's what I would have went for. I said, man, look at the circumstances. You can't tell me that she just woke up one morning and wanted to kill her mom. And I still say she didn't really want to kill her mom because there were certain things that Nick Godejohn couldn't do. I want to rape your mom. You cannot rape my mom. She still cries to this day when she says, I hear my mother calling me when I'm in the bathroom when she was getting killed to save her, and I did not. You can say it's an act. Watch the documentary. I don't think that it is. Every time I've seen a Gypsy Rose interview before now, this always is the constant. She's always in deep sorrow. She's always crying. She's always saying, I miss my mom. She's always said she did not have to die. I just wanted out of my situation, and either I was going to die or she was going to die because she was not going to release the chains. Dee Dee could have saved her own life by coming out saying, I know I'm going to jail for a number of years, but I lied. My daughter ain't sick. Rod, come get your daughter. Dee Dee will be breathing right now with the rest of us. When it comes to Nick Godejohn, I don't think he should have went to jail either. There is something seriously wrong with Nick Godejohn that jail is not going to fix. Again, I'm not saying that he shouldn't spend a lifetime behind bars, but put him in a lifetime in a mental health hospital where it's doing him some good. If he is that mental the way that I think that he is, and remember, I have a son that's on the autism spectrum. If he's that far gone and he has, multiple personalities on top of that and a whole bunch of other things, I think sometimes you got to wake up and say, well, maybe jail is not for everybody. We got to take him off the streets. Here's where we're going to put him at. if you see any of his interrogation, he always continuously says, I would have never done this, if it wasn't for her. I'm in love with her. This is why I did it. As you can see, Gypsy Rose wanted nothing to do with him. She even told him that in the letter years ago that they were through. Nick Godejohn, people, he has some problems. He had problems before this. He thinks that he shift shapes into a werewolf. He has multiple personalities. He has a thirst to kill, whether it's him or whether it's his alter ego. I don't know. No, he should not be walking the street. I agree with that. I don't think jail is the place for him either. So the question that we got to ask ourselves is this. Even though Gypsy Rose was the mastermind behind it, she only got a 10-year sentence. That, again, I believe is because the hell that she already suffered, she already went through her own personal hell. We don't want to continue to punish the victim. But should Nick Godejohn have the same privilege or right that she had? Says Nick Godejohn would not have been there if it wasn't for Gypsy Rose Blanchard. He would have never known who Dee Dee Blanchard is. It would never enter his mind to kill Dee Dee. So you have to ask yourself, do you think that he should also have a 10-year sentence with the possibility of getting out Nate? And when I say getting out for him, I mean getting out of jail and going to a mental facility. My opinion. He should have went to the mental facility for the rest of his life from the beginning. And Gypsy Rose Blanchard should have also went to somewhere that could have helped her mental state and help her cope with what it was that she did. Because I truly do believe it is something that she just did not ever want to do. All right, so if you want to dig deep into this case, you want to hear directly from Gypsy Rose's mouth herself. She has released a book on January 9th called Released: Conversations on the Eve of Freedom. If you want to check that out, it's on Amazon. It's about $6, I believe, maybe $6.99. It is a digital book only. That will tell you everything you need to know from her perspective. All right, guys, I thank you for joining me for this one. I know it's a little bit of a longer one. Had to give you all of the details and particulars in that. I'm working on trying to see if I can find Gypsy Rose or how to send her a message. If I can, I would love to have her on the show. I would love to have her continue to tell her story and to get it out there. That's what my platform is all about. And I think it'd be interesting for some of you to actually hear directly from her mouth, other than the things that you've already heard, what her story is. So I'm working on that. Wish me luck. All right, so coming next week, for the author, we're going to have Lizbeth Meredith. She wrote a book called Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters. You don't want to miss this. She was a subject of a movie, and now she's writing this book to tell everybody about it. If you've ever heard of Not Without My Daughter, the Betty Mahmood story, this is similar to that. Both stories are real and true. You do not want to miss my interview with Lizbeth Meredith. And then, for my extraordinary person, we're going to talk to Arazi Cook. Arazi Cook helps people keep their animals who are in domestic violence situations. If you guys don't know this, the animal suffers just as bad as the human does when they're in domestic violence situations. And sometimes because of shelter rules, people have to go and leave their pet companions behind. Arazi Cook has set up a foundation to help keep domestic violence victims and their pets together. You don't want to miss me talking to her as well. All right, I would like to remind you of the other podcasts that I am associated with. Extinguish with the great LaDonna Humphrey drops your way every Sunday. We're just wrapped up the deep dive murder into the Melissa Witt case. So if you guys haven't heard any of Extinguish yet, hop on over and check that out. I'll leave a link for you in the bottom. And then I am the proud producer of Deep Dark Secrets, LaDonna Humphrey and Amy Smith. This season, they're tackling trafficking. You don't want to miss any of those. Both links will be in the description below. And if you're trying to keep up my schedule, I will be making an appearance in Fayetteville Town Center in Fayetteville, Arkansas, True Crime Fest, August 2nd and 3rd of 2024. I'll be hanging out there with some great podcasters. And if you are in that area and decided you want to drop by, please do say hi. We'll get a photo. I'd love to hear your opinions on the show and what you think. And also, September 21st and 22nd, I will be appearing on behalf of Extinguished with LaDonna at CrimeCon UK. So if you are in that area or you just like to follow CrimeCon where it goes, be sure to grab your ticket, come by and say hi to us. If you do grab a ticket, you can use the code EXTINGUISH that will get you 10% off of your ticket purchase. All right, guys, I thank you once again for joining me. I know you have many options in true crime and investigative podcasts. I am grateful that you have chosen me to be one of them. I hope that your 2024 has got off to a great start. I wish you nothing but the best this year. And always remember, always stay humble. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion can go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. One link to the link tree has it all. Feel free to drop us a line at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Arslan. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wilde and David McClam. Theme music, Legendary, by New Alchemist. Introduction and ending credits by Jackie Voice. See you next time on True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.